In December of 1900, a supply ship approached a remote lighthouse off the coast of Scotland. The crew expected to find 3 men doing their jobs. Instead, they found something that has puzzled investigators, historians, and researchers for over 120 years. An empty lighthouse. 3 men, gone without a trace. No bodies, no struggle, no explanation. This is the story of the Flannan Isles disappearance, and why, even today, nobody can fully explain what happened. To understand this mystery, you first need to understand where it happened. The Flannan Isles are a small cluster of rocky islands located about 32 kilometers west of the Outer Hebrides, off the northwestern coast of Scotland. They are remote in every sense of the word. No permanent residents, no shelter from the Atlantic Ocean. Nothing but raw, unforgiving weather and open sea in every direction. For centuries, sailors feared these islands. The waters surrounding them were treacherous. Hidden rocks, unpredictable currents, and some of the most violent storms in Europe. So, in 1899, the Northern Lighthouse Board completed construction of a lighthouse on Island Moor, the largest of the Flannan Isles. It stood 23 meters tall. It was built to last, and it needed 3 men to operate it at all times. Those 3 men were James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald McArthur. These were not inexperienced workers. James Ducat, 43 years old, was the principal keeper, the most senior of the 3. He had spent over 20 years working in lighthouses. He was considered reliable, steady, and professional. Thomas Marshall, 28 years old, was the second assistant keeper. Relatively newer to the job, but capable. He was responsible for maintaining the logbook. Donald McArthur was a substitute keeper, filling in for a colleague who was unwell. He was an experienced sailor before becoming a keeper, and was known for his calm temperament. 3 experienced men, isolated on a rock in the Atlantic Ocean, doing their jobs, until they weren't. On December 26, 1900, the supply vessel Hesperus made its way toward the Flannan Isles. The ship had been delayed by several days due to severe storms, common in that region during winter. As the Hesperus approached Island Moor, the captain, James Harvey, noticed something immediately wrong. No flag was flying on the signal mast. The lighthouse keepers were required to raise a flag whenever a supply ship was approaching. It was standard procedure. No one appeared on the landing platform to receive the ship. The island was completely, unnervingly silent. Captain Harvey ordered crew member Joseph Moore to go ashore and investigate. Moore climbed the steep path to the lighthouse alone. He later described feeling deeply unsettled before he even reached the entrance. Something about the silence, he said, felt wrong. Moore found the main entrance door closed, but not locked. He entered carefully. The interior appeared, at first glance, entirely normal. The lamps had been cleaned and prepared for use. The kitchen was tidy. The beds showed signs of having been slept in recently. But there was no one there. Moore searched the entire lighthouse. He called out. He went from room to room. Nothing. He returned to the Hesperus, visibly shaken, and reported what he had found, or rather, what he had not found. A search party went ashore. They combed every inch of the island. They checked the rocks, the landing areas, the storage buildings. The 3 keepers of the Flannan Isles had simply vanished. As investigators began examining the lighthouse more carefully, several details stood out. In the lighthouse, there were 3 sets of oilskin waterproof coats, the standard protective gear worn outdoors in wet weather. 2 sets were still hanging inside. 1 was missing. This meant 2 of the keepers had gone outside without proper protection during what was reportedly bad weather. Experienced lighthouse keepers did not neglect basic safety precautions. According to the rules of the Northern Lighthouse Board, At least one keeper was supposed to remain inside the lighthouse at all times. This was a firm rule, not a suggestion. Yet all three men had apparently left together. For all three to be outside simultaneously, something extraordinary must have occurred. Something that made staying inside feel like the wrong choice. A chair near the kitchen table had been knocked over and not set back upright. This small detail suggested that whatever happened had happened quickly. Investigators turned to the lighthouse logbook, kept by Thomas Marshall, hoping it would provide answers. The final entries described unusually severe weather conditions in the days leading up to the disappearance. An entry from December 12th described enormous waves and powerful winds battering the island. Marshall noted that James Ducat had been unusually quiet throughout the day. He also recorded that Donald McArthur, known for his calm temperament, had been crying. A subsequent entry from December 13th described the storm continuing and stated that all three men had been praying. These were experienced lighthouse keepers, men who had spent years working in some of the most extreme weather conditions in the British Isles. A storm, however severe, should not have reduced them to prayer and tears. What exactly did they witness in those days leading up to their disappearance? The final entry in the logbook, dated December 15th, read simply, "Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all." After that, nothing. The logbook ends there. The Northern Lighthouse Board launched a formal investigation. Near the western landing area of the island, the investigation team discovered evidence of significant storm damage. Iron railings had been bent and broken. Heavy equipment boxes had been displaced from their storage positions. Ropes were found scattered across the rocks. Based on this evidence, the official theory emerged. One keeper had gone to the western landing to check on equipment. He was struck by a wave and swept into the sea. The other two rushed outside to help and were dragged in as well. This theory was logical. It was consistent with the physical evidence, but it had a serious problem. The logbook's final entry stated the storm had ended, and the sea was calm on December 15th. If the men disappeared on that date, why would they be in danger from giant waves on a calm day? Some researchers have proposed that the region can experience what is known as a rogue wave, a sudden, massive wave that can arise without warning, even in relatively calm conditions. These waves are rare, but they are real, and they have been documented in the North Atlantic. But even this does not fully explain why all three men were outside simultaneously, in direct violation of standing regulations. The superintendent who led the investigation acknowledged in his own report that he could not explain this. Over the decades, a number of alternative explanations have been proposed. Some researchers believe the damage at the western landing predated the disappearance by several days, and that the keepers were inspecting old damage when a second, unexpected wave struck. Others have pointed to the logbook entries as evidence of psychological distress. The crying, the praying, the unusual quietness. Did the isolation and the storms cause one or more of the keepers to behave in ways that led to a fatal outcome? This remains speculative. No theory is without gaps, and without bodies, without witnesses, and without further physical evidence, none can be conclusively proven. Here is what the evidence confirms with certainty. 3 experienced lighthouse keepers were alive and working on Island Moor no earlier than December 15th, 1900. In the days before they disappeared, they recorded unusual weather and showed clear signs of distress. When the supply ship arrived on December 26th, all 3 were gone. Storm damage at the western landing suggests a violent encounter with the sea. One oilskin coat was missing. A chair was overturned. The logbook stops abruptly. That is the totality of what we know. Everything else is inference, theory, and speculation. The Flannan Isles disappearance has endured in public consciousness for a reason. It is not merely a ghost story. It is a genuine historical mystery, one that was formally investigated, seriously examined, and ultimately left unresolved. The lighthouse itself is still standing on Island Moor. It was automated in 1971 and continues to function today, operated remotely. No lighthouse keeper has lived on that island as a permanent resident since 1900. In the history of maritime mysteries, few cases match the Flannan Isles disappearance for its combination of physical evidence, unanswered questions, and sheer strangeness. The most likely explanation remains some variation of the rogue wave theory, an unexpected surge of water that overwhelmed all three keepers before any of them could react. But most likely is not the same as certain. And until new evidence emerges, which, 125 years later, seems increasingly unlikely, the lighthouse on Island Moor will continue to keep its secret. Which theory do you find most convincing? The rogue wave, a psychological breakdown, or something else entirely? Drop your take in the comments. And if you're interested in more unsolved historical mysteries, the next video is right here.